Hi everyone and welcome back to another video. So I used to be an English teacher here in South Korea. That's actually how I came to live in Korea in the first place. If you want to know more information on how I came to Korea in the first place, then I will link a video up above. But basically I had two teaching jobs here in Korea. My first ever teaching job that got me to Korea in the first place was with EPIK, otherwise known as the English program in Korea. This is a government-run program that hires foreigners to teach English at public schools throughout Korea. And my second teaching job was a job with a Hagwon, or a private academy. In my case, it was a kindergarten and elementary Hagwon. In today's video, I just wanted to share with you why I left both of those jobs. Especially the Hagwon job, because that turned out to be quite the life experience for me. And I'm hoping that by sharing my experience with that Hagwon, it will hopefully help you guys from making the same mistakes. And hopefully this video overall will just give you more advice on how to come to Korea as an English teacher in the right way. So let's start off with the positive first, which was my experience working with the EPIK program. So I applied for the EPIK program for the February 2018 intake. For EPIK, you put down your preferred location, but they do inform you that if you don't get your preferred location, then they try and place you close to your preferred location. And in my case, I put my preferred location as Seoul, but because I applied a little bit late, I unfortunately didn't get placed in Seoul, but they informed me that I had been instead placed in Gyeonggi-do, which is the area surrounding Seoul. I had no idea on the exact location until I arrived in Korea, which is the case with the EPIK program. But for me, I really wanted to come here and I decided to accept the position. The school I was placed at in Gyeonggi-do turned out to be Yangpyeong. Yangpyeong is about 2 hours away from Seoul by subway. But despite not getting placed in Seoul, I actually had a really good experience teaching with the EPIK program. Overall, I would really recommend the program because it's very, very easygoing. At the school that I was placed at, I actually only taught English lessons for about 2 or 3 hours a day. And the rest of the time is something that's known as desk warming, which essentially is when you just have time to sit in your classroom at your desk and plan some lessons or get some work done. But honestly, for the EPIK program, because it's a public school, they usually have textbooks already, and so they just give you these textbooks and tell you to plan lessons around the content that's within the textbook. With EPIK, they basically do most of the work for you. Because the only work that I really had to do was lesson planning, and I had so much of this free desk warming time within each school day, I actually ended up planning my entire year's worth of lessons within around the first 3 weeks to a month, I would say, of me being at the school. So for the rest of the school year, this desk warming time was essentially just my free time. I had this time to study Korean and work on anything besides my English teaching. And honestly, sometimes I would just sit there and watch YouTube because I had free time, which in hindsight was an absolute blessing in disguise compared to my second Hagwon job. But at the time, honestly, I didn't see it this way. I think what made this desk warming more irritating was that I had to do it during the school holidays. So even when the school was closed, I had to still go into the school and sit at my desk. So for example, over the summer break, when all of the other teachers were on their holiday enjoying their free time off, I still had to go into the school and sit at my desk and just do essentially nothing because there was nothing left for me to do. So yeah, I did find that kind of irritating after a while because I still had to be at school. And after a while, I did feel like time was really going by very slowly because I had these long periods of time where I wasn't teaching and I didn't feel busy at all. In addition to that, I did spend a lot of my free time on the weekends traveling to Seoul because that's where I obviously really wanted to be in the first place. So for those reasons, at the end of my 1-year contract, I decided not to renew the contract with my school, and instead I decided to look for a new job in Seoul. And I also was just curious about Hagwons. I wanted to see what the teaching experience at Hagwon was like compared to EPIK.
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
So I decided to hire a recruiter because I figured if I hired a recruiter, then I would get more of a chance of being placed at a good Hagwon.
That is not correct.
So when I was sent the Hagwon that I ended up applying for, I went for the interview, and in hindsight, there were many red flags in the interview that I just completely ignored because I was so hell-bent on working in Seoul and staying in Korea. I'd started applying for jobs a little bit late, so I was a little bit stressed that I was going to get kicked out of Korea before I could find a job. And again, hindsight is such a wonderful thing because I now know that there's such thing as a looking for work visa, which I believe is the D10 visa. So English teachers can actually swap to this visa and they can look for a new job while on this visa so that they don't have to leave Korea. I believe this visa is valid for 3 months too, so it gives you a lot of time actually to find a new job. But because I was young, naive and panicking, I didn't really know about this. Basically, I was just young and stupid, I think, and I was really scared that I wouldn't get to stay in Korea because by this point I'd also met my now husband and I knew he was planning on coming back to Korea when he finished studying. So I was really desperate to stay in Korea. But another important thing to mention is that with EPIK, the school that you get placed at actually own your apartment and they pay for your apartment. So if you quit your job at the school, or if you, God forbid, get fired or anything, they kick you out of the apartment because that's their apartment and they need it for the next teacher to move into. So you have to leave that apartment no matter what. In hindsight, I should have saved up money and looked for somewhere to stay and switched to a D10 visa while I figured out getting a new job. So take it from me, who learned the very hard way. If you are in this exact same position where you want to look for a new job in Korea, do it this way. Don't do what I did. Save up some money and find somewhere to stay, switch to the D10 and give yourself a lot of time to find a new job. Don't just panic and take the first job that comes your way. But back to my young, naive and terrible decision making. One red flag that I noticed in my interview that I want you guys to look out for is the interviewer, which by the way was the man who actually owned the Hagwon. He didn't ask me really any questions about me. I felt like the interview was more him just explaining the job and what the job was to me. Basically, it just felt like the guy, instead of interviewing me to try and find out if I was a good teacher or if I was the kind of teacher he wanted at his academy, he basically just explained what the job was and he offered me the job there and then on the spot in the interview. In hindsight, I do wonder if the teacher before me had suddenly left and that's why he was in a rush to try and hire me, because the experience that I ended up having at the Hagwon, I wouldn't be surprised if the teacher before me had just up and left them. So that's definitely something to be on the lookout for, I would say. If in your interview the interviewer seems like they are in a rush to hire you, I would take that as a pretty big red flag. Another important point to mention is that with the EPIK program you get given 21 days vacation, whereas Hagwons or private academies usually only give you about 10 or 11. They're not just vacation days for you to use freely whenever you want to. The school will actually tell you when you can use them, so they're not really vacation days. Me, because I was very dumb and I was panicking over trying to find a job in time, I just accepted the job. And in hindsight, yeah, I really f***ed up. Unfortunately, I can't mention the name of the Hagwon because defamation laws in South Korea are extreme and I will get sued. There are websites that I'm aware of for foreigners who are trying to teach English at Hagwons here in Korea, and these websites have names of Hagwons that people have worked at and had really bad experiences with. So if you do want to work at a Hagwon here in Korea, I do recommend you doing a lot of research before you pick one. But on to my experience. So like I mentioned, the Hagwon that I worked at was in the Gangnam area, which is an area that's pretty well known for having a high standard for schools. The working hours stated in my contract were 9 AM until 6 PM, but my actual working days were more like 8:30 AM until 8 PM to 9 PM. So I would arrive at school around 8:20 or 8:30 AM. I would teach lessons non-stop from 9 AM until 12 PM when we would have a lunch break. Said lunch break was not really a break at all for me. So this lunch break was actually time where I had to stay in my classroom and I had to help the children with their food, which wasn't a problem. I wasn't really upset with that, to be honest with you, but I also had to do marking at the same time. Just helping the children eating was fine, but trying to do marking of their daily language books and feed them at the same time was quite the struggle. Then I had more lessons with the kindergarten students from 1 until 2:30 is when the kindergarten students would finish their lessons and then they would go home. And then the elementary students would arrive at 3 PM. So then I would teach the elementary students from 3 PM until 5 PM. Once the elementary students left to go home at 5 PM, I would then go to the teacher's room where I would sit and mark books. I would create reports for the children. I would communicate with the parents through Kids Note and basically just do any of the work that I hadn't had time to do during the day. One thing to mention is that I got particularly unlucky with my Hagwon because I was the only full-time teacher at that school that was given 2 kindergarten classes to teach. One class that I had to teach was split between me and a part-time teacher that was at that school, but the part-time teacher only worked 9 until 3 PM. So she only taught the kindergarten students and then she would go home. And most of the time, honestly, she would just clock out at 3 PM and leave me with most of the work to do. There were days when she wouldn't be able to do their daily language books for some reason and then she would just give them to me to do instead. So as you can imagine, this situation became increasingly stressful over time. Like I said, in my contract it stated that my working hours were 9 AM until 6 PM, but I rarely left school at 6 PM. I would usually be doing work until 8 or 9 PM every night, trying to juggle all of the marking and report writing and all of the other stuff that we had to do for 2 kindergarten classes as well as my elementary classes. I did try to bring my concerns to the head foreign teacher of the school, who was basically in charge of all of the foreign teachers who were working there, but she basically told me that essentially there was nothing she could do, that she was aware that the person who I was splitting the class with was leaving at 3 PM and leaving work and stuff like that for me to do, but she essentially said there was nothing that she could do to help. And honestly, hearing that just made things so much worse because I was already struggling a lot, and then to also receive no help it just felt like a completely helpless situation to be in. The Hagwon should honestly have hired another full-time teacher to take over that second kindergarten class, but for some reason they just wouldn't hire another full-time foreign teacher to take that class on. The reason why I stayed teaching at the school for as long as I did was mainly the kids. I absolutely loved the kids there, and the parents were really nice for the most part. Having said that, another thing that really did piss me off was that one of the parents had complained about the way that I pronounced tomato. So to give you a little bit of context to this, I've already mentioned something called daily language. This was basically every day the students would get an English sentence given to them in something called their daily language book. So we would cut these out and stick them into their daily language books. And they were to read this sentence to their parents at home. And in order for them to understand how the words are pronounced, the English teachers had to record themselves saying the daily language every day and send this to the parents. And so on this one day, I had recorded a sentence that had the word tomato in it and sent it to the parents, and the next day I was told by my Korean co-teacher that one of the parents had complained about the way that I pronounced tomato and had actually had the audacity to say that I said it wrong, that that's not how you pronounce tomato. I do understand that I think a lot of Koreans are used to the American pronunciation of words, but to say that someone who is a native speaker of English is wrong for pronouncing a word the way that their country pronounces it is just astonishing, honestly. I think also what made this worse was that my co-teacher actually asked me to re-record the audio again, but pronounce tomato tomato.
Immediately no. Immediately no. Like instantly I was like, yeah, no.
If they wanted me to pronounce it tomato, they should have hired an American teacher, not a British teacher. On its own, that incident obviously isn't that much of a big deal, but it's just one of many things that accumulated over time that made me really angry and made me resent working at the place that I was working at. I don't want this video to come across as too negative, but obviously people don't quit jobs that they are happy with, otherwise they wouldn't quit. Overall, I will say I loved teaching as a job generally. I absolutely adored the children that I worked with. With the extreme workload, the crazy working hours, the amount of pressure, and the fact that nobody at the school was willing to help me out, just felt like I had no other option but to leave. My mental health at the time was really deteriorating. I would spend all of my time that I wasn't at the Hagwon just thinking about how much I didn't want to go back. And I absolutely dreaded going into work every day. And honestly, there were multiple times where I just had complete breakdowns over the amount of work that I had to complete because it just felt impossible. I did have thoughts of just trying to stick it out for the children that I was teaching, but it really reached a point where my mental health as well as my physical health was in rapid decline. And that's just an important PSA. Nothing is more important than your mental well-being. No job, no country is worth more than your mental well-being. As much as I wanted to stay in Korea, I just knew that for the sake of my mental health, I needed to quit the job and go back home to the UK. If you are debating on coming to Korea as an English teacher, then please, please, please do your research and be very, very mindful.
Very demure, very mindful
Of Hagwons like the one that I worked at. As I mentioned earlier in the video, there were many red flags in my interview in hindsight. So if you do get interviewed, just be very mindful of the things that I mentioned earlier, like if they don't ask you any questions about yourself, and if they seem very eager for you to accept and start the job, then I would say that these are some pretty big red flags to just be aware of. Also, please make sure to just ask them as many questions as you can so that you can gauge whether or not that job is going to be a good one or not. If they don't like you asking questions, then that in itself is a huge red flag. So please make sure to ask as many questions as you can, because take it from me, you do not want to end up working at a Hagwon like the one I ended up working at. Like I mentioned earlier, above all else, your mental health is the most important thing, so please make sure that you're putting that first. Being in Korea is not worth you having the worst mental health crisis that you've ever had. So that about sums up my time as an English teacher here in South Korea and why I ultimately ended up quitting teaching here. Hopefully this video was informative and helpful for you. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and please subscribe to my channel to see more Korea content from me. Thank you for watching. Bye!